everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today I am very privileged to have as my guest a gentleman by the name of Scott Johnson. Scott Johnson is an industry veteran. Many of you who might have been involved in the Chocolate Alchemy Forum or in the early days of the chocolate life may know him as Sebastian. And one of the things that Scott has done is he's taken his industry expertise and he's built a new software platform, which is called Atlas. And today, Scott and I are going to be talking about Atlas, and we're going to be demonstrating some of its capabilities. So, Scott, welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate.
Wait, Clay, thanks. It's good to see you again. Thanks for inviting me to come hang out with you for a while.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been. I was trying to remember, was the first time that you and I ever met in. Have we met in person, or has it only been virtually? I'm trying to remember. We've known each other for what, over a decade, or we've known about each other for over a decade.
Yeah, it's been a while. I don't know that our paths have ever physically crossed, but virtually, it's been a while.
It has been, and I am like completely happy to be able to do this. But I do want to remind anybody who might be watching, whether it's on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, that you can go into the live chat in YouTube or the comments in LinkedIn and Facebook. And if you have a question you'd like to ask Scott about Atlas, you can put it into the comments and we'll get that comment up on screen, or the question up on screen, so Scott then give us a chance. So Scott, right now I'm sharing the user interface for Atlas. We'll get there in a moment. But why don't we talk a little bit about your background and what motivated you to build Atlas, right? And what do you want to achieve with the platform?
Yeah, I think, I've been very fortunate. My background is pretty diverse. And so I spent about 30 years working at pretty high levels for very accomplished organizations, doing very difficult things, right? So things at scale. And I am in the fortunate position to be retired early now. So I get to choose how I spend with my time. Along the way, one of the set of experiences I had was getting to live in jungles for large periods of time, doing difficult things in very remote places, spending a lot of time with cocoa farmers, right? And so that ultimately is what's driving a lot of what I do now, is trying to find ways to improve the livelihood for cocoa farmers. One of the mechanisms to do that is by building better tools, so professional level tools for smaller users, to remove some of the obstacles, because chocolate is difficult, right? There's a lot of moving pieces to it. Cost structures are difficult. The regulatory environment is difficult. The equipment oftentimes isn't standardized. All this stuff adds up to complication. So if there are things that I can do to systematize some of that in a way that's easy to use, to help users understand and increase their sustainability by understanding their costs and removing barriers, ultimately that cascades to their businesses being viable, which then feeds into improving the purchasing power of, back to cocoa farmers and improving their livelihoods. So that's sort of the summary of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Atlas is one version of how I'm pursuing that.
Gotcha. So one way to think about that is, we've talked about, if you want to support sustainability at the farm level, you need to be sustainable as a business, right?
100%.
And you just really need to focus on that. And so I think there are two aspects of Atlas that I want to focus on when we get to sort of demonstrating its capabilities. One of which is, how can you understand what your cost of goods sold are, and what are the inputs to it? If I start out with cocoa beans that cost this much, and then I roast them and I lose a percentage, and then I crack and winnow and I lose a percentage, and then that has an effect. You can't just use the landed cost of cocoa beans in your warehouse is how you factor in the costs. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there. So there's a lot of technical understanding. And then there's also, how do I understand, is my recipe compliant with CFR, 21.163, whichever I'm doing, which, am I making a sweet chocolate, or am I making a milk chocolate, or am I making a white chocolate? There's that compliance. We have nutrition facts. We have recalls, lot level data. So I understand which ingredient. There's a lot of technical stuff that's associated with this, which is one of the things that Atlas does. But there's also this notion of you're coaching people through the process. I mean, for example, if you're a startup chocolate maker, you may say, I'm going to do, recipe X, and I have this piece of equipment. And so every recipe has to go through that equipment. And, here comes Atlas, based on your years and years of experience. And it could say, well, you may want to rethink that approach because it's not going to be, it may not be successful, or it will be much harder than you think of to deliver a certain kind of result. But let's talk, if we can, about some of the more, the business process oriented stuff. And what I want to do is I want to, again, share the screen so that people can see the Atlas user interface. Where would somebody start off using it? Assuming it's brand new and this is the first time they've opened it up, where would somebody start using Atlas?
Yeah, so this is kind of structured along the lines of how I think, right? And so this first block here is really about development, right? So you're not making anything yet, but you got to start with your raw materials, and then you use your raw materials to build a formula. Think of your formula library as almost like a recipe box of all your ideas and things you're testing out. This is where we would start. From there, we can progress to what are the things we want to put into production, and how do we build our finished goods and understand our margins and all that. But we're going to start with at the beginning with our raw materials. And so I've already made a dummy file. So we're just going to open up a dummy file.
Can I make one point here? Is that many people have said to me that they don't like the idea of cloud-based solutions. Number one is their internet may go down, and so they may lose access to something which is a vital component of their day-to-day operations. But also, they don't like the idea of their data being up there in the cloud and not necessarily being secure with what's going on. And so one of the things I just want to let everybody know is that Scott just opened a file that's on his local computer, right? And so your data is your data, and it stays on your computer. Now, if what you want to do is you want to back it up securely to the cloud, you can do that, but you've got your choice of how you're going to back it up. It could be to a local drive, it could be network attached storage. So I just wanted to point out that when you opened up that file, it was sitting on your local computer.
100%. That was a very intentional choice for the reasons you just talked about.
Gotcha.
So do you want me to kind of walk through the modules and we'll do a little bit of a tour here? Is that?
Well, so again, I think that let's first walk through the logic. So you're going to start off, in a place that makes sense, which is you're going to go into the raw materials section of it, and you're going to say, I have this many cocoa beans, right? And I paid this much for them, and I've got a lot number. So I'm assuming, is that correct? And then you're going to say, I've got sugar, and I have cocoa butter, and I have all these ingredients. And what happens is that you now know who you bought them from and when you bought them from, and if there's a lot number associated with all of your ingredients. Am I correct?
Well, yeah. So for cocoa beans, that's very much how it's set up. So cocoa beans are fairly complex, right? Because say we order one container of cocoa beans from the Dominican Republic, or anywhere, wherever you get your cocoa beans. From that container, we can do a bunch of things with it, right? We can do a light roast, and we can do a medium roast, and we can do a dark roast, and we can alkalize it, or it can be natural. We can make a bunch of different products from that one thing. And each one of those things are going to need different levels of unique traceability, and we'll have different cost structures. And so that's not necessarily the case when we buy things like sugar or lecithin, right? When we buy a lot of sugar, we don't convert that into 10 different kinds of sugar. So the cocoa bean manager is a little bit more complicated than our other raw materials for that reason. And so in cocoa bean manager, if I click that, what it will do is it starts with.
Just can I say one more thing? I am guessing that people are having a hard time reading this. So Scott, afterwards, what I may do is ask you to give screenshots of this data. And so what I can do is I can put it on the post in the Chocolate Life. It's still going to be difficult for people to read, but I just want to let people know that we're giving them an idea of how this works. right? And you can see it work on live data, right? Even though it is a demo file. So just sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, not at all. And I just made it a little bit bigger. I don't know if that
Yep.
is easier or not.
Not for my 67-year-old eyes.
Every day I understand a little bit more. Um,
Gotcha.
so for cocoa beans, right, it starts with the assumption of we're going to get a bunch of raw cocoa beans in. And that's when we click, let me go back to the home screen. When we click on this bean manager, that's what it's asking us to do, is what's our lot of the raw cocoa beans that we're receiving. And this is going to give us an overview of all the cocoa beans we've already received. And so, for example, here in this one, again, dummy test file, we're bringing in a lot of 500 beans from Ecuador, cleverly from SupplyCo, right? Just generic SupplyCo. And when we bring them in, it assigns a lot number automatically. If I were to click on that, it's going to tell us a little bit more detail behind that. So here's the lot number it assigned. If our supplier had a lot number on it, it allows us to keep track of that. Where's it coming from? Who do we get it from? What's the purchase order? All this kind of stuff. How much per pound did we pay for it? How much did it cost us to get it here? Were there other landing costs associated with bringing it in? And it uses that to calculate our landed cost, right? Because we all know that whatever the price we're paying for our beans isn't really the cost of our beans.
So can I ask one question here? You said price per pound. Can I set this up so it's in SI units? So everything's in kilos and grams?
You can, absolutely. So on that
Absolutely.
home page, there in the settings, you can set it to imperial and metric units. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So at this point, right, we've brought in whatever our bulk load of beans is, but we're not working with raw beans, right? We don't put raw beans in the chocolate. We do stuff and things with it. And this is where the concept of a processing batch comes in. And this is probably going to be the most complicated component of it. Everything else from here on out is pretty straightforward. But because beans are complex, there's a little bit of complexity here. And so we have hundreds or thousands of pounds of raw beans that can be roasted in multiple ways. We can do light, medium, dark roast with it. Anytime we do a processing batch, we're telling the system that we're going to go get 50 pounds or whatever amount that we're working in out of our bulk storage and do something with that. We're going to process that batch. And so if I click on this Ecuador light roast, this is my history of I went and I pulled 100 pounds out of that bulk batch.
Mm-hmm.
I cleaned it, right? So I can see when I pulled it. I can see, we all know that when we pull raw beans, we probably have to clean it because there's going to be some sticks or some rocks or, a tennis shoe or a bullet or whatever we found in there, right? We're going to clean it. We're going to roast it. It allows us to capture what's our starting and ending temperatures and our duration. And then as we're roasting it, we're losing something. So we're losing moisture, we're losing dust, we're losing some shell. It'll calculate losses along the way. If we've got a critical control point for a micro kill step, it'll allow us to record that. So again, we've got some traceability. It'll allow us to capture what our moisture is. Can
I jump in here really, really quickly? So you
100%.
mentioned critical control point. So I am capturing data which could be used part of some sort of HACCP control reporting.
100%. Yep.
Cool.
And so all of these fields are optional. You can use Atlas without doing any of this, but the more of it you use, the more helpful Atlas will be for traceability or for quality metrics or for costing. Again, the more you use any tool, the more valuable it is.
So one question I have about this processing step that you're talking about. So what you're doing is you're taking an inventory, which might consist of, say, 500 kilos of beans, and you're taking 50 kilos out of that inventory. And so there is a lot number associated with the 500 kilos. Is a new lot number assigned to this batch?
It is. Yep.
Cool. And by the way, for everybody who has never thought of it, that's really, really, really important, right? That you can have different sublots, right, from larger lots, and it's really important that you're able to have that. This lot number of this process came from this lot number of beans, and that kind of structure is really, really important. Before we go further, what I want to do, Scott, is I want to get a user question up on screen. So somebody's talking about this from LinkedIn. And what I want to do is I want to stop sharing your screen really quickly and answer this question, which is, so LinkedIn user, I don't know what your name is. You're here anonymously for one reason. So the default cost of an annual license is $1,200 a year. Is that correct? US dollars a year.
Correct.
Now,
Yep.
my understanding, Scott, is that's about the same price as an annualized license for Recipal for the full version. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. I think it's a little bit less, but yeah, it's right in the ballpark.
So what I want to say to everybody is, if you are a member of the Chocolate Life, with Scott, I have arranged for special discounts on Atlas, because this is what we want. I want you to do as somebody who has been involved in this business. Is like, my gosh, this is a tool that people need, right? So an annual Guru membership on the Chocolate Life is $420, but you've got a 50% perpetual license on Atlas, bringing the annual cost of license to $600, right? Which means that if you have the Chocolate Life membership and Atlas, it's $150 less than if you just purchase the Atlas license. And so one of the things that I want to do, and Scott has been very, very gracious to be able to support me in this, is that through supporting of the Chocolate Life, we can make your license to Atlas much more affordable. So I just wanted to point that out to the LinkedIn user, anybody who's had an opportunity, who is watching this, that you can go to this post on the Chocolate Life, which is the post for today's episode. Let me bring it down to a different size. And you could scroll and you can get the list of discounts. Importantly, this is a perpetual discount. So you'll save $150 the first year, but $600 the second year, and $600 the third year. So hopefully, this will answer your question. This same user, I think, Scott, let's get there. And I don't want to interrupt this aspect of the demo, but what we'll do is, does Atlas have nutritionals from ingredients in the database, or does it require manual entry? If so, does it contain advanced ingredients in the database? So what I'm going to guess, Scott, is it's impossible to have every possible ingredient that you might put in chocolate in the database, right? So there is a database of common ingredients and what their nutritional profiles are. But if you wanted to add an ingredient and you had the macros in them, you could add those in. Is that correct?
It is, yep. So, and I've changed my perspective on this, and we'll see it. But so it now comes preloaded with 10 common ingredients, right? So liquors and whole milks and non-fats and things of that nature, cocoa butter, preloaded. So sort of a starter kit, as you will. But to your point, there's too many raw materials to put in, and for me to include automatically. It allows you to put anything you want in as a default, and I can certainly work with people to do that. But it's really easy to do.
Right. So, for example, if I used peanuts, I could go look at the back of the ingredients label for my peanuts, right, and say, oh, here's all the information on the panel, and I can just add it in. Or
Correct.
Hazelnuts or any other nuts, or if I'm using a fruit powder or whatever, right, I can add those. I can add those in. And this might be, Scott, one of the places where I would say, this is where having a shared database would be interesting, right? Which is, you could copy the advanced ingredients that everybody is using, right, and share them with people. But I think that the notion of privacy is much more important to work with.
It'll be interesting to see how it evolves, right? Because right now, it's one thing. In 6 months from now, it may turn into another thing. My personal database of ingredients is thousands and thousands long, which would probably be overkill for some people. But it also contains probably private information, like specific specifications or cost structures that maybe not everybody wants other people to see, right? So thinking about how it evolves, what's most useful for the largest group of people in a way that also protects their information is something that I'm going to be pretty sensitive to, but there's probably a way to do it.
So this is one of the reasons why I'm really excited about working with Scott on this, is that I have a background in exactly this kind of UI UX, incremental development in software. It's what I did for the first 20 years of my career before I got into chocolate. And so, for example, maybe there is a file that you could double click on and import in, and it will have the nutrition facts for a lot of advanced ingredients, so you don't have to enter them in by hand, right? It may not be there today, right, but it is something that could be added in the future. And perhaps there are some ingredients in your database, like nuts, that don't necessarily, right, have any proprietary information associated with them.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a good question from the user. So it does come pre-populated with 10 of the most common ingredients. And then we can take a look at how do you add another ingredient, and it's very, very straightforward to do.
Gotcha. All right. So I don't necessarily want to go into the how do I add an ingredient, right? What I wanted to do is I wanted to get into some of the higher level capabilities. So
Yeah.
what we've done here is we've said we have the notion of an input batch of cocoa beans, or a lot of cocoa beans, and then we have a processing batch of cocoa beans, which enables someone to say, oh, I took this batch of cocoa beans and I did these things to them. I roasted them this way, I cracked and winnowed them, I started off with this amount, I ended up with this amount, right? And there is a lot number associated with it. And then when you generate an actual batch with these beans, right, that you've processed, that lot number carries through for what it is what's going on. Right. And what's going on here in this right column? I see what you're doing over here. What's going on in the right column?
Yeah. So when we buy our beans, right? I think these ones we had listed for $4.50 or whatever it was a pound. We know that's not our cost. We're going to clean it. We're going to roast it. We're going to lose some moisture. We're going to lose some shell. This helps us understand. And at the end of that, what we're left is the nibs, which is what we're actually interested in using, right? We don't use beans in our chocolate. We use the nibs. And the nibs, because there's been incremental losses along the way, are going to be more expensive than the beans. Really, really, really important distinction, because that influences what your finished product margin is. And if you're using the cost of your beans to try to calculate the cost of your goods, you're probably going to have some unpleasant surprises, because those losses are going to drive really substantial changes, right?
I can guarantee you, right? So just to give an idea, a good yield going from whole beans to nibs is going to be somewhere in the 80 to 85% range. But let's just do the math. If your beans cost you $5, right, 80% means you're adding another $1, right, to the cost of those nibs. So the difference between $4 and $5 is a lot, right? Yeah. When you think about the cost of a recipe.
So that's what this is doing, right? So we know we bought the beans for $4.50. Our landed cost was $6.75. But by the time we processed this batch, that we cleaned it, we roasted it, and we cooled it, this batch is now costing us $9.64. Based on the nibs that we actually got out of that, with a 70% overall yield. Right. When we link this to our nib profile, and this one's already been done, what that does is it takes this information, it puts that into our raw material database, so that when we formulate with it, it's pulling this specific information at this specific cost structure into our recipe, so that every single time we work with it, it's using this cost. Now, let me back off of this screen for a second and go back to here. And at the top of this screen, which is our bean screen, we'll see our nib profiles, right? So this tells us about the raw beans that we received, but we just processed those raw beans into a batch of nibs. This then is going to tell us everything we want to know about those nibs. So if I click on that, and then
No, what I want you to do is I want you to go back, because I want to point out something to people. Before I forget it. So you have a dashboard across the top. So this is a real-time running inventory of how much cocoa you have in stock, right?
It is, yeah.
Right, and then
and nibs.
And nibs. All right. So just for people, all right. I just wanted to point that out before. So you do have a running inventory of how much cocoa you have in stock at any given time. So I just wanted to point that out.
And let's linger on that for just a second, right?
Sure.
Because 5 minutes ago we were talking about internal lot numbers and sublot numbers. I don't know if we're going to get into that level of detail today to walk through it, but when we get to the production tab, when we say, all right, I'm done developing the product, I want to produce it for commerce, so if this is going to be sold, it will then ask us to choose our raw materials and our lot numbers. And for nibs that have automatically been assigned lot numbers, it will let us either do a FIFO system and pull in whatever was last made into our system and record that number, or it will allow us to go in and select specific sublots that we want and capture those lot numbers at that cost structure so that we know exactly what the cost of our formula is and exactly what the sublot number is.
But I also want to ask this particular question because anybody who's been in any of the classes I give about chocolate making knows that one of the things I keep telling people is blending is your friend.
Yeah.
So what you could do is you could take, 3 different lots of the same or different roasts and select them, right? And so what you do is you now have a new lot which consists of sublots. So you can accommodate blending, right, in your recipe at this level. But it could also be a blend of more than one producing country. So if you've got a blend that, so for example, like Valrona's Caraíbe, which is a blend of beans from the Caribbean region, right? You can go and say, oh, I'm selecting Costa Rica and I'm selecting, and you put that together in one lot, correct?
100%. Yeah.
Fabulous.
And it automatically records the lot numbers, right? So you don't have to go back and write it down so again, this is meant to bear all the weight of the stuff that is just complicated and make it easy.
So you start off with a lot of beans, you get a lot of nibs, and they're different numbers. And then you can select lots of nibs, and it creates a new lot, which points back all the way to the original beans.
It does it automatically. Yeah. You don't have to think about it. It just does it automatically.
Gotcha.
Which is so nice, right? Because trying to keep all track of that on paper it's a nightmare.
It's the reason why people use databases, right? To do this kind of stuff, and well-programmed database. So let's go into the next tab then. Right. So, I've got like user interface questions. Like what I'd really like to do is, can I filter this list that you're showing me? So I can say, oh, I've got 500 kilos of this origin of beans and 1,000 kilograms of that origin of beans. Right.
So there is some filterability there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but yeah, you can filter.
You don't need to demonstrate it. I'm just asking, do the numbers at the top update to show when I've filtered into a particular producing country, say, show me all the Dominican? And the answer is it does.
So yeah, and the reason I go into here, so now we're in the nib profile. And the reason I go into here is before I talked about, listen, everything in Atlas is optional. You don't have to put anything into any field, but the more of it you use, the better it will be. And if I go on this and I look at this very first one, this Dominican Republic dark roast nibs, I did 11 batches of it, right? It's depleted. I've depleted 4 of those batches, but if I click on this, it's going to pull up the overview of everything it knows about those batches. And it says that our weighted cost average of this is $6.23. If we switch, that's the average of every single batch it's ever made. So my last batch, unfortunately, has the exact same price as the weighted average. So let me back out of that and show one that's going to be different. I'm just going to pick the next one on the list, right? So weighted average of $5, but my last batch actually cost me $5.89. So if I click on this, that number just updated because each batch is probably going to have a slightly different cost structure because maybe there's a little bit more trash in that batch or you lost a little bit more moisture. And if we scroll down here, right, it's going to start to chart all that information. So my cost trend, I can see over time, are my costs of that being in that particular nib profile increasing or decreasing, right? I don't want to see wildly variable costs because that means that my finished good is going to have wildly variable costs. But if I do start to see those, I can go back and look at my yield or my shell and nib or my moisture and start to figure out, do I have a problem here? And if so, where? if my cost structure is showing wild variation over time, or if it's increasing, right? If I start here at $6, but after a year I'm up to $7, working with the exact same lot of material, then I need to
Mhm.
start going back and look at, well, do I have a trash issue, right? Do I have foreign material issues in my beans?
Mhm.
Is my nib yield screwy because my winnower is off? Is my roaster not doing what I think it is? And it allows me the data to go back and figure out where in my process do I need to troubleshoot so I can get those costs back under control.
Okay.
Let me just stop there for a second because this is really, really helpful information.
Right. No, no, I understand it completely. And my first question is, what I really want to do is I want to measure the moisture content of my beans before I put them in a roaster,
Yes.
right? And so that I can actually, I can incorporate that data into a chart like this. Because it may be that the beans came in with a different moisture level, right? Or it may be that the way you're storing them, all of a sudden humidity has changed, right? And so one of the things I'm going to ask you, Scott, offline is, do you have a recommended moisture meter that people can use for
Yeah.
cocoa?
A couple of them.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure that people have that information. So let's back out of this, Scott, because I think that what we've spent is get an idea here. From the next point, let's talk about, okay, how does this become a recipe
Okay. So,
or a formula, or
yeah.
however, whatever you want to call it?
So what we would have done is we would have gone into raw materials and told it about our sugar and our cocoa butter and whatever else it is that we're working with, right?
Vanilla, whatever it is that we're doing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So once we've built that, then we'll go to create a new formula. We will click the button cleverly named new formula. And what that will do is that will bring up this screen. Now, again, I think in terms of projects. And so every time we create a new formula, it's going to automatically assign it a project number. We'll come back to that because rarely in my experience do I get the thing right the first time. And so I like to think iteratively and developmentally. And
Mhm.
so I also want to keep the history of what I've done because I learned from that, right? And so it'll assign this. You can tell it who made it. It's going to put the date in there. What do you want to call it? What's your batch size? Again, if you set that to metric units, it'll speak in terms of kilograms and not pounds. And then this becomes sort of a catch-all, laboratory notebook of you can make it as big or as little as you want. But what do you want to tell yourself about this formula? So a year from now, when you go back and look at it, what were you trying to accomplish, or what results did you get?
So I want to jump in right there, number one, because again, if you've ever taken any of my classes on chocolate making, what I say to every chocolate maker is one of the most important tools that you have is a notebook, right? If you do not write it down, you will forget it, right? And so the fact that there is note taking ability in the middle of this to remind yourself what you were thinking, right, when you're doing this is incredibly important, because if you've got hundreds of formulas across hundreds of batches across hundreds of production runs, you are not going to remember everything, right? And before we get to the next one, Mike King at Encore Coffee Company in Kansas City, I don't know, Scott, if you know Encore,
Hey, Mike.
um, has a question, which is, do you do anything with profile management? So for example, if I've got an instrumented roaster and I can capture the roast profile in a software like Artisan, for example, can you store the roast profiles, segment or analyze data based on roast profiles? Is that built in right now into Atlas?
Well, so it's not going
And
to
Mike,
import roast.
and Mike, am I interpreting your question properly? I want to make sure that I'm asking Scott the right question. So I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Scott.
So it's not going to import other data from other equipment, right? But what it will capture is temperature max, temperature min, duration, and that's a manual entry right now. So roast duration, temperature, start time, ramp, that kind of stuff. And again, this will be one of the interesting things to see over time, right? Like, so undoubtedly Atlas is going to evolve over time. I'm going to need to think about what the right way to do that is, because if I try to make an update every time somebody goes, I'd like it to do this, then it just turns into a very complex thing to manage, right? And so probably we'll take a bit of a wisdom of the crowds approach in terms of figuring out what will be the most helpful for the most amount of people. But to Mike's question, there's not an automatic way to import that from other equipment, but there is a way to capture temperature and time by nib profile.
Good. And what I might say is there's no automatic way at the moment.
At the moment.
Doesn't mean so. But again, Mike, what I would say is that the number of instrumented roasters, and by instrumented roasters, I mean one or more thermocouples in the roaster, which is logging temperature changes during the entire duration of the roast. There aren't that many specialty chocolate makers, craft chocolate makers, who are using instrumented roasters, right? And so absolutely, I understand the desire and to be able to add it to see, oh, how does a roast profile alter that stuff? The basics are there. So you could capture key data during the roast and you could enter it manually and it would keep track of it. So once you've settled on a roast profile, you can make sure that that data gets used across multiple processing batches. Is that correct?
Yeah, no. Interestingly, there is another gentleman who's doing some really cool work on creating those interfaces that you're talking about, Mike. And he and I have talked a number of times about how do we bring what he's doing in combination with what this is doing, and what's the marriage of things like that look like. So it'll be really interesting to see where how things evolve in the future for sure.
And one of the things I would say, Mike, is hey, get a copy, get a license to Atlas. Support the Chocolate Life more than you do, because you've been a huge supporter of the work that I do. And then we can have this conversation with Scott, knowing that all the other people that he's talking to about the best way to implement what it is that you're doing more broadly. Because one of the challenges, as Scott pointed out, and I know this from being a software developer, is that somebody comes to you and does X, Y, and says, can you do X, Y, and Z? And you may be responding to their particular use case. And what you want to do is to say, okay, how do I step back and generalize what you're doing, right, in order to be able to do it? But one of the things that Mike says, as at a minimum, right, could you just attach a document, attach a third-party roast profile log? So just a little text file that would do it. So
yeah, so there's that's a great thing, right? So you're talking about notebooks before, right? And so whether it's in the raw material page or in this formulation page, there's this add attachment button down here that will allow you to think about it as appending pictures to your notebook, right? And so whether it's supplier information or exports from your equipment or pictures you've taken of whatever, you can attach all those to your raw materials or to your formulas for exactly that reason.
But can you attach them to the batch processing?
To the raw material that comes out of that. So for the nib, yes.
Okay. Gotcha. 100%. So Mike, there is a way to be able to attach a roast profile for a particular batch at the moment, but it's not integrated into the visualization, right? How do these changes affect what's going on at the moment?
Correct.
Cool. All right. So Scott, I mean, by the way, one of the things about the way these episodes go is that often, I have a run of show the way I want to do things, but comments, right, they take us aside. So Scott, please continue with developing a formula page.
Okay, so let's see, where were we? So we've got all of our ingredients into Atlas already. Now we need to tell Atlas which ones we want to use, right? And so we're going to click this add button, and that's going to bring up a list of everything that's in our raw materials list. We can either scroll through it, or we can just start to type here and it'll exclude, right? So let's build a dark chocolate, and I'm going to type nib. So we're going to pick those Ecuadorian nibs, and then we'll keep it simple, right? So let's do a 70%. So we're going to say that this is, and it's asking in percentages, right? So I'm going to say it's 30% sugar, and then 70%. So before I type anything here, when I type 30, this appeared, right? This was not here before. And as soon as we start importing a formula, the regulatory engine, which currently is written for CFR, there is a model, there is a design for European regulatory compliance as well. I just haven't built it into there yet because I haven't done it. But right now, it's recognizing that the ingredients that we've chosen, and we put a number here at the level that we've chosen it, does not comply with CFR 163 in any fashion right now. As
Gotcha.
soon as I type in 70, that's going to change. So now it says, okay, you are now green light from a regulatory perspective for something. That something is semi-sweet. And if I click the button here for view details, if I click anywhere along here, what it's going to do is it's going to tell us more about that. So for 21 CFR Part 163, and the most current revision is January 1st, 2024, this is what the requirements are for chocolate. This is what our values are. And then these are 4 of the most common subcomponents in the regulatory world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere it's green is where we're meeting those things. Anywhere where it's red, it's not. Obviously, we're not a milk chocolate because we didn't put any milk in it, but this is telling us why we're not a milk chocolate. Obviously, we're not a white chocolate for lots of reasons, right? So there's lots of red here.
Mm-hmm.
But this particular formula is going to be compliant both with sweet and semi-sweet. It's green across the boards. It's green down here. And then this section down here is going to be a little bit more of a dynamic regulatory feedback loop where its content is going to change based on the specifics of your formula.
So can I ask a quick question?
There for a second. Yeah.
So I want to ask a question. In 21.163, is there a formal legal definition, a distinction between semi-sweet and bittersweet within the sweet chocolate category?
So there is semi-sweet, right? The CFR does not talk about bittersweet. It doesn't talk about dark chocolate, right? So the irony is our vernacular uses dark chocolate, but legally that doesn't exist, right?
There's no legal definition for dark chocolate. Colloquially, it is any 100%. Chocolate that doesn't contain dairy, but I can add dairy into sweet chocolate and be compliant. It's a mess. Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And so this is one of those pain points, right? Just for fun, I still have access to a bunch of my friends at FDA, and I had them pull some challenge information over the past 5 years, and actions are increasing over the past 5 years from a regulatory perspective. And this is one of those fields where it's just really complicated. And if you've ever looked at the CFR, the manuals are thick. It's written in technical jargon. Companies have entire departments dedicated to this, and they still get it wrong. And so, again, this is just something it's very painful. This is meant to be a systematized way of removing the pain, so that as regulatory actions increase, your exposure to them decreases.
Gotcha. All right. Okay. And so I just for me, this is when you talk about European, you're talking about the Codex Alimentarius?
No. So I'm using the EU Section 2000 regulations, but we could build a codex design has been created as well. I just haven't implemented the logic.
Gotcha. So what you'd want to do is you'd want to select back and forth, right? Between, this is for US, this is for the EU, this is for codex compliance.
Yep. So what'll happen is that there will be a selector up here, right? Between EU, US, Colombia, whatever, where you would allow you to choose.
So you can take any particular recipe and then be able to select across the different compliance regimens to find out if this recipe was compliant for a particular export destination.
Is the way it's currently designed. Now, it's not implemented yet, right? Because if the demand is there, then I'll do it. I know how to do it. I just haven't built it yet. Right now, the functionality is CFR.
So I just want to let people know that this is really, really smart. What you've done is you coded in the ability to do it. It's in the architecture, right? In terms of what's being done, so that when there is a market demand to do it, you can add it, right? It's just when you go, I'm only care about the US and I haven't really thought about the rest of the world, which unfortunately is the way a lot of people think these days. It becomes an issue, but it's architected in. If we can go back to the previous page, Scott, there's one thing that I want to talk about from a recipe perspective. is let's say that what I've done is I've purchased quote unquote the same sugar from two or more different suppliers at different price levels, right? So each one of those sugars can be considered to be a different lot from an ingredient, from a raw materials perspective. So I can keep track of who the supplier is and who the cost is of the particular sugar that I'm using for a recipe, because that could be a variable cost as well.
Yeah, you wouldn't do that here. That would be in the production section of it, but 100%, right? So who your supplier is, what the lot number of what you're actually using is all captured. It's all there.
Gotcha. So I mean, it's again one of those things. You say I buy sugar and sugar has the same price, and like, no, that's not the way it works, right? So I just wanted to dive back, because when you're in this recipe, this formula developer, what you're doing is this is a formula. So when you do a production batch of this, what you can do is you can do the costing of it, right? Which is specific to the specific lot of cocoa nibs that you're using, the specific lot of sugar that you're using, the specific lot of butter that you're using, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I just want to point it. So let's jump out of this, because I think, believe it or not, we're 3/4 of the way through the hour, right? What I do want to talk about is how would I build a nutrition label for this? Right? Because I think that when many people think about this, they're going, oh my gosh, I want to use Recipal because what I want to do is I want to figure out how to do a nutrition facts panel, and I'm going to have the cheapest version of this so I can generate 1 or 2 or 3 or pay a la carte for doing it. So with all of this stuff, how do I go about generating a nutrition facts panel? Because I think that this is one thing that everybody wants to do. So everything you've talked about now about lot numbers, right, is about recall traceability. When you get a lot number for something at the end, you can trace everything back in case there's an issue. So that's all taken care of, right? But from a nutrition facts panel perspective, how do we take a particular recipe, a particular formula, and generate the new nutrition facts panel for it?
Okay. So what we would do is, again, we started sort of, this is our developmental sandbox, right? So once we get a formula that we're happy with, we've developed it in the lab, we're like, all right, this is the thing that I'm going to put on my production floor. We would then, there's a button in there called promote. We would promote that to production, and then that resides in your production library, which is a subset of what was in your development library, right? So here we can see, in this example, I've got 13 things in development. 5 of those things have been promoted to production.
Gotcha.
What you're talking about, I think, is what's the nutritional label for our finished good?
Yep.
So our finished good is going to be our chocolate, right? So it's going to be all the ingredients that went into our chocolate, and it's going to be our packaging materials. So here's where we tell it about our packaging materials, right? So our foil and our boxes and our whatever we got. And then we would go to build the finished good. So what the finished good builder does is and we'll walk through this, but it says, all right, I'm going to choose which chocolate is in my production library, and then I'm going to choose my packaging materials. When we put those things together, we get a library of finished goods. And so I'm going to jump to the end here just because of time, and we're going to look at some finished goods that have been built. And so when I click on this, here is a 70-gram dark chocolate bar, and this is built on a direct to consumer, calculate from total price of $5. That'll make sense in a second here. But when I click on this, edit it, oops. Here's the name. This is what we're calling it. It's 70 grams. We can work in either ounces or grams, and it's going to start to calculate what our cost structure is. So in a 70-gram bar for this formula, it's costing us 57 cents. I'll then pull in my packaging components, right? So this particular one has a gold foil wrapper and a bar wrapper. That's adding another 45 cents.
I just want to jump in quickly. How do you manage a bar which has inclusions in it? Right? Is that part of a previous recipe step?
And that would be just in the recipe. Yep.
In the formula step. Gotcha. I just want to make sure. So this cost of goods, if we scroll up for what the chocolate is going to be, is going to include the inclusions that are a part of this bar.
Yeah, and so we could talk through how to do that, but
Nope.
the approach would be a little bit
At this
different.
point, at this point, it's the capability. So
But yes, it can do that.
yeah.
So then we pulled in our packaging, we pulled in our overhead and our waste. This will calculate your waste factor. We can go back and look at that if you want. And then it's going to ask you, how are you going to get that to the hands of your consumer? You can do so a couple ways, right? You can go direct to consumer, you can go direct to a retailer, or you can use a distributor to get it into your retailer's hands. And each of those are going to have different costs along the way. This then will either calculate what your margin is based on your cost, right? So if I'm calculating from a retail price, and I know that my retail price, it needs to be $5, it will then tell me, what my breakdown, my margin is, or I can calculate from my total margin, say I want to get a 30 margin on it, that puts my retail price at this.
Is that gross margin or markup? Just a question. Gross margin or markup?
That's gross margin.
By the way, for people who don't know the distinction between gross margin and markup, you need to go figure it out, because that difference, which could be the difference between $1.25 and $1.33, right? So 25% markup on a dollar is 25 cents, but a 25% gross margin on a dollar is 33 cents. And so you need to be, that 8 cents different can be the difference between being profitable or not on that product. So if you don't
100%.
understand that difference, you need to understand that difference. Sorry.
So back to your question. Your question had nothing to do with cost, but to get to the nutritional, just the way it's set up and structured, I went through the cost, because that at the bottom of here, we'll see nutrition panel. So before we get there, like, we build the cost structure to make sure we understand, is this going to be viable or not, right? Am I going to be able to get the margin that I want or not? But then when we click here, nutrition panel, it's going to bring up a selector between the US and Canada. And then we've got different formats that we can use which are approved in the US and Canada. So for US standard vertical, it's saying, for this formula, which was a 70-gram bar, this is what our nutritional looks like. If I wanted to go to a tabular or to a linear based on my packaging, when we click on that, it's going to change the format of it, same exact information, but it's just presenting it in ways that are still approved by the FDA, right? So these are still approved formats. That's going to depend on your packaging, and then the same thing for Canadian format as well.
Right. And I'm guessing that when you start doing the European formats and all this other kind of stuff for compliance, right, purposes, in terms of that, you will have, is this EU compliant? Is it other labeling labeling regimes compliant?
We build in that logic. Yep, 100%.
Gotcha. Really important. So I have another question. At some point, you can put the number of servings per the bar. So when you do the nutrition profile, it also does that breakdown.
Yeah, it'll calculate it, right? So if we were to, it's just for giggles, change this to a 700-gram bar, right? We're going to go big here, right? If I clicked on the nutritional panel, we are now at 18 servings, right?
Gotcha.
So it's there's all this is highly regulated in the United States. And there's a lot of if this, then that type things that just make this is really complicated, right? So it's going to start with what's your bar size? It's going to refer back to what the actual regulations are, and it will just calculate it for you.
Gotcha. Right. So really, really, really important. So Scott, with a product like this, we could probably spend the next 5 hours going into specifics about how a particular capability is implemented. I want to stop here because we don't have 5 hours. We've got more like 5 minutes. So let's ask a question. Number one is, I think the market for this is, number one, it's established chocolate makers, right? You've been doing this, but in this cost where nothing seems to be under your control, at least understanding where things are. So, no matter what your turnover is, if you're an experienced maker and you're trying to say, where can I be more efficient in my process, right? Where can I understand, where my losses are too high, I need to bring them into, where might I be exposed to an insurance risk, right? Because one of the ways you can reduce cost is you say, I'm doing all this kind of stuff. you can go to your insurer and say, I want a discount because I'm doing all these things. I mean, there are lots of things that you can do once you understand what the data are. So, if you're a big company, you're a $100 million company, you've got something like this as part of your production management tools, as part of your HACCP or ISO 9000, whatever it is, you've got this stuff. But if you're a small company and your turnover is under $1 million or under 10 million, right? Chances are you're doing this by the seat of your pants. There are no ERP systems for chocolate making, for chocolate makers by chocolate makers, and that's it. So that's why I think this is important. If you can reduce waste or reduce the amount of time you're spent do something, or loss of ingredients through trying to brute force, right, a recipe that won't work, right? So, for example, if you're trying to do a 2-ingredient 70% with a low-fat bean in a ball mill, it's not going to work, right? Right? Or it's not going to work easily. It's going to be a problem. And that's one of the things that Atlas provides is you've got, the 30 years of experience Scott has got as a coach sitting over your corner, right, helping you be a better chocolate maker, right, and especially from a business perspective, right? And this also works, I think, for people who are starting out, right? If you're starting out, right, maybe you've only got $40,000 or $50,000 a year in sales, maybe not even that, but you're investing $100,000 worth of equipment and all the other things, right? That going in, having this kind of discipline from the very beginning, right, is going to be really important for you from a business perspective. And so I think that the potential user for this is anybody who's involved in chocolate making, whether you're a brand new startup thinking about how you're going to go into this for the first time, or whether you've been doing it for 5 years, 10 years, and you've got sales. And I hope I understand that correctly, right, Scott? But I also want to ask this question, which is, what's the, you've been offering this for some time now. What's the number one objection you get? Why aren't, if I can save $5,000 a year by spending $1,200, right? Why doesn't everybody have a copy, a license?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. The most interesting conversations I have are people who will simultaneously recognize they're like, listen, I'm in a spreadsheet nightmare, right? I've got all these systems that I've cobbled together using the tools that I have, and like I'm finding ways to make it work, but it's complicated. And I've got spreadsheets everywhere, and everything's out of date all the time, and I change this and that. So they recognize that goes, it works until it doesn't, and then falls apart. But also will simultaneously have a hard time changing, right? And so the complaint is that this works differently than my spreadsheets did, even though I recognize that my spreadsheets are problematic for me,
Right.
Which is a little bit of human nature because change is hard, right?
Right. So there are two things I'm going to say. So, my first job at a high-tech startup in computer graphics was in 1983. And I spent a lot of time over the course of 20 years, talking with people, potential customers about this specific issue. There are two things I want to point out to people. And then I got another question from Mike, which we've already answered, Mike, but we'll answer it again. Is that one of them is that something is intuitive when it maps onto the way you already do something. Oh, I already do it this way. So the hardest thing about adopting one approach over another approach is you have to change the way you do things. Right? And that's often the biggest mental hurdle, right? I've been doing it this way. I'm familiar with it. Everybody in the company is trained already. Oh, this is assuming you have a set of SOPs that you follow. Everybody is trained, right? Which is not something that we can, not something that we should assume that everybody has SOPs. But I'm very, very familiar with it. And what's the cost of retraining? So that's a huge issue, number one. The other thing that I would say is that my father, was in the business of developing tools for information management. And Scott, you may not know this, but I am a named co-inventor on a patent which was successfully litigated against Microsoft. Nice. In this area, and because they stole our technology and built it into the basis of .NET. Right? Now, unfortunately, I didn't have any economic participation in the patent when that decision came down. So, I just got I get to say
I won.
I'm a, we beat Microsoft, right? But one of the things that my father did is he helped people over this exact situation. And he used to say, listen, if you need to update your filing system, what you don't do is you don't do it all in one tranche, right? You don't say, here's my filing system one day, and a week later, I have a brand new filing system, and how much energy is required to do that? What you do is you put another filing cabinet next to your existing filing cabinet. And as you take something out of one cabinet, you put it into the next cabinet, right? And so you incrementally change your mental model about the way things are organized. You still have the old one if you need it, and you've got the new one. And over time, right, it becomes the accepted way of doing things. And if after a year or 3 years or whatever the law is about data retention for records, right, in your industry, it's just like if it's in this old filing cabinet, you don't need it anymore, right? And so I think that sometimes the way we think about it is, I have to do this for everything in order to make it useful. The answer is no, right? You can take the things that are central to what you're doing, the stuff that you do all of the time, and update it that. And then, oh, maybe the recipe you do once a year or the recipe you did 5 years ago. Well, it's interesting for historical purposes, but maybe it's not relevant. And so if you start thinking about this as an incremental upgrade rather than I have to make the entire change at one time, that's been my experience about helping people, right, adopt an entirely new system. Because really all it takes is one worker somewhere to say, I'm not going to do this, right? And everything fails, right? I'm sure that you've worked for some of the largest chocolate companies in the world, and you understand about how one obstinate person in middle management can get in the way of making a really, really needed, important wholesale change. And you don't have to name names, but I'm guessing that's something that you've experienced in your career.
Yeah, I think I may have been that person at some points in my career, right? But I think it's natural, right? Like change is hard, right? And I get it. Nobody decides to start running by running the Boston Marathon, right? Like your perspective is an interesting one where easing into it is probably oftentimes the right approach.
Gotcha. I'm going to jump here. So what I want to do really, really quickly is, because we're slightly over time, is I want to answer Mike's question. And because he may not have been in the call at the beginning where he mentioned it. And he's talking about, he found the answer. So he's asking, is it a software as a solution? The answer is no, this is not a cloud-based solution. Your copy of Atlas sits on your computer, and your data sits on your computer. It's not shared in the cloud. So if what you need to do, and this I highly recommend it, is that what you do is you have a backup solution, right? Which makes sense for your business. You might have a network attached storage device which backs up your computer. You could have something which is in the cloud. You could have a folder, and that folder is synced to Google Drive, or it's synced to Microsoft OneDrive, or whatever, right? I use a service called Proton, which is based in Switzerland. And so the US government can't get at anything, right, of my stuff that's in, and I can have a folder on my computer which is synced automatically up to Proton. There are lots of ways to do this. But the point is that you make the decision about backup, which is appropriate for your business, that your data is not up in the cloud and potentially compromised because of a security leak that you didn't have control over. So it's really, really important that way.
That's exactly what I do, right? And so I have the good fortune of working with people all over the world, and we'll often put the Atlas file on a shared version, a shared drive of some sort. That way, if you're in, I don't know, Lithuania or Colombia or Asia, I can still access the file and help you troubleshoot. Or if you're just at home sitting on the couch and you want to see what happened in production today, you can open it up while you're sitting on your sofa. That's 100% of how I use it.
That's a great. So I'm going to assume that multi-user access, right, to the file, so anybody can log into the file who has the password credentials to open it up.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Now, are you keeping track of changes on a user basis? This person made this change?
Nope, it does not log changes. If you store it in on something like Proton or Google Drive, obviously that's got version history, right? That'll work to that effect in some degree.
Okay.
But the application itself does not do iterative change log history.
At that granular level.
No.
Right. Okay. So, all right, just a quick note. But what I want to do is I want to say we're at the end of the scheduled hour. I want to be very, very respectful of Scott's time. Although, Scott, if there's interest, we can get back and do this again. What I do want to point out to everybody is a couple of really important things. So for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I create a post. And this is the post for today's episode. Now, you start off, and here's, if you want to watch the archive on YouTube or LinkedIn, it'll be up on Facebook for 30 days. The links are here if you want to go back and rewatch this. There's an overview of what the episode is about, right? But I want to point out that on this post, there is a competitive comparison table. So the left-hand side is the feature that we're talking about. The first column is Atlas, and then you have what other competitive platforms, right, offer in the way of features, and then there is some relative cost here, so you can get some idea. And so this is on this page with an annualized price at the bottom. What I do want to also point out is for Chocolate Life members, Scott has been incredibly generous. Let me make this a little bigger so we can see you, Scott. Scott has been incredibly generous, and he's made it possible for me to offer members of the Chocolate Life significant discounts. So if you are a Guru member of the Chocolate Life, which costs $420 a year and includes 3 coaching hours or consulting hours in that $420, you'll get a 50% perpetual discount on Atlas. So instead of being $1,200 a year, it'll be $600 a year. And the license plus your Guru membership is less than the cost of the full cost license for Atlas. And the same thing is true. If you don't think you can spend $420 as a Guru member, there are other membership levels and you get, commensurate discounts. I'm trying to get you to say, with, again, Scott's approval, that we're all in this together. I want to promote Atlas. I want specialty chocolate makers, craft chocolate makers, to be more efficient and better as businesses. And this is one way we're going to work together. Scott wants to make sure that it's the same thing. He wants to get these tools out in the world so that people can use them and they can be more sustainable as chocolate businesses. Because if we want to make the impact that we want to make at the farm level, affecting farmer lives and livelihoods, we need to be sustainable as businesses, first and foremost. Right. And so we all have a shared goal, even though we're going about it slightly differently. Is that right, Scott?
100%. You nailed it.
Okay. So I'm going to do a quick statement, is that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. If you're not a member of the Chocolate Life, you can click on the join button, become a member. And if you want to become a premium member at an annual level, you're eligible for discounts. You just need to send me an email, and I will introduce you to Scott and say, hey, this is a member of the Chocolate Life at this level and is entitled to this discount. If you don't go through me, right, Scott is going to say, I'm sorry, we need to talk to Clay first, right, in order to make sure what discount you're eligible for. But please do that. Your work, your support for the Chocolate Life makes all of this possible, right? And with that, Scott, a closing note before we end the episode for today? Something you want
to? I'd say it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, man. Thank you for doing this. This has been a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. I think it's hard to know how many small chocolatiers are out there. There's best estimate 4,000 to 6,000, and you or I can only talk to so many at a time, right? So if we're really looking to drive scaled improvement, be it knowledge or systems, this is maybe one of the approaches that we can take to try to do that. And what's good for the bee is good for the hive, to quote a little bit of Marcus Aurelius for you Stoic fans out there. And if we can find ways to make small businesses more sustainable, that helps drive sustainability throughout the entirety of the chain. So thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it.
And I'm looking forward to following up and doing more of these as functionality increases, as the user base grows. And I just want to let people know that this coming Sunday, the 19th, the day after tomorrow, is the monthly Ask Me Anything episode. for members of the Chocolate Life. So if you are a member of the Chocolate Life and you'd like to join me on Sunday during the AMA, I will do my best to answer more questions about this if that's one of the things you want to talk about this coming Sunday. And with that, it's Friday, the 17th of April. I want to thank everybody who's been here. Like, subscribe, do all the things so that YouTube will share this with everybody. I want to thank Scott for being my guest today. And to close out, as I always do, which is to say, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao. Thanks, Scott.
See you guys.